Hello, everybody. Welcome to Narativ Live on a Tuesday night, a very special edition as we look at the verdict in the Chauvin trial. An unbelievable verdict, but really not that unbelievable because we all were expecting it. Can you imagine if it had gone another way? Look who's here today. What a great all-star cast. Nina Burleigh, the national journalist and author of an upcoming book, a book called Virus. How are you, Nina?
I'm good, thanks. It was a good day.
Yeah, it was a good day. And Noel, how are you? Noel Casler.
I'm excellent. It's the verdict I was hoping for, so I'm happy.
And the man who's going to help us work our way through all the legalese here, Andrew Laufer. How are you, Andrew?
Hey, Zev, how's it going? Feeling pretty good.
Yeah, today was the day I dreaded, I got to say. I was feeling a little bit, I can't believe I'm going to sit and watch TV set again to figure out if their justice system really works, because that's what we've done so many times in America, right? You sit there and you wait for this verdict. You know what happened because you've watched the case. And yet so many times we've been disappointed in the past, but today was not that day. Today was a very different day. So, Andrew, why don't you talk about the significance of that? Because there have not been many cases like this in the history of American justice, really, where the right side has won when it's come to a police crime like this.
Yeah, unfortunately, there hasn't been enough of these types of verdicts yet. I'm hoping today is the beginning of change for that. A lot of it goes to how difficult it is to charge a police officer. Prosecutors really do have a wide latitude, but a lot of times they're too afraid to put certain types of charges before grand juries and let them do their work. And then you also have juries who just look at whatever police officers do or say is the rule of law, and they're always right. So you've had a lot of that in the past, but hopefully, the evidence was just so overwhelming in this case.
What made the difference this time? Is that the videotape? Is that really what clinched it ultimately? Is the fact that so many people are on social media all the time? It's just hard for crimes to get hidden in any way.
Well, yeah, the video I think was what convicted him. I don't think there's any justification one could find, or the most deft attorneys could somehow manipulate that would be able to get around that. It was just so painfully obvious what happened here. And there was really just no other reasonable verdict to come to.
Yeah, they tried on so many levels, didn't they? They tried all these different potential excuses, and that might have given the jury some wiggle room in some of these charges. There were 3 charges ultimately they could have chosen from or convicted him on. They went for all 3, so that's significant that they went for all 3. They didn't look for a way out. There's no wiggle room in terms of this particular verdict.
And defense counsel has to do what they have to do. They're in a very tough spot. Some of the things they did, I didn't agree with. They have to do what they have to do to try to get their client either his charges mitigated, his potential exposure to prison mitigated at the time that he's going to be there, or dismissed. You can't really hold too much of a grudge against them for doing their job like that. Everyone is entitled to a defense. But the evidence was just so overwhelming. This is what I say. It doesn't matter what attorney you have. If the evidence is so overwhelming against you, you're going down. It doesn't, like we talk about Trump all the time here and his cronies and what have you, and it doesn't matter who they hire. They're hiring half-decent attorneys now, or decent attorneys now. Some of them are very good. It doesn't matter. Does not matter when the evidence is just so against you, you're going down. It's as simple as that. Jurors usually get it right most of the time. There's always issues from time to time, but most of the time they vet the evidence correctly. They ask the right questions, and our judicial system works. There's not enough focus on how many times jurors get it. It's always about this guy got off and why did he get off? And there are things that cause that to occur usually. All right, not always, but most of the time. So, today was definitely another good day.
It was a good day in terms of all of that. Now, Noel, I was thinking a year ago, which is really when the murder happened a year ago. It seems like it's a lot longer. Maybe it's because we've been through so much in the last year. But last May is when all of this started, and it kicked off a series of events, which are protests, stunts by the former administration, riots, other violence came out from this. It really was a spark for what the Trump administration was hoping was going to be the way they were going to win the election. They were hoping they were going to strike fear into America's hearts by amping up the fear around the Black Lives Matter movement, around the defund the police strategy, all of that. It's hard to believe that's only been a year ago, and hard to believe that that's what started everything. I was just thinking about your man, Donald Trump, there in the middle of all of that, storming onto a protest with his defense secretary to take a photo shot outside a church. We've come so far from that kind of goofy craziness that we were in a year ago, and it's only just a year ago.
Absolutely. And Ivanka Trump putting a Bible in her $700 purse and walking with her father over to have that photo op. Oh, and it played into his hands. That unrest was everything he wanted because it emboldened his side. And look, the other guys are Antifa and they're going to burn down your cities. And of course, none of that was really true. And I think a lot of those fires were started by outside agitators. And I remember watching those protests and the guys with the umbrellas, and it looked like a training op. And it benefited him because I knew dudes on the Upper East Side come November when New York City, for example, was preparing for what the election results would be. And they were starting to board up stores and stuff again. And I remember seeing on Facebook people like, look, they're getting ready for an election result they don't approve of. They're not boarding up the city to protect us from Trump voters. And in reality, like, who rioted when they lost the election? It was Trump voters that attacked the Capitol. But his whole MO has always been like that sort of class division and racial division. Now, it played into his hands, those riots. And as I said, I think they were ignited by forces on the right.
I think so, especially in Minneapolis. I remember those first nights of protests there where I think the police station was burned down. Or it turned out that it was created by anarchists on the Trump side or on the right-wing side. And that they're the ones who started those fires, which is stunning to think about. That's where the spark of that violence came from. In fact, you could say that throughout the entire year, Americans have been remarkably restrained, considering everything they've been through, considering where things could have gone from last May until now. There's been a remarkable, disciplined. There was lots of protesting, lots of good voting, lots of good, proper civil rights stuff, but never, it's amazing that things did not go out of hand. Can you imagine what it would have been like if Donald Trump was still president of the United States tonight?
If you're asking me, God, no. I'd be watching from Canada at the very least, if not Finland somewhere. No, I can't imagine what it would be like. And thankfully, I don't have to imagine that world for at least another 3 years or 3.5 years. And I'll say this one thing. I saw how Fox News immediately reacted to the verdict. And it was once again, they were bringing up what I just said. They were bringing up, at least the country won't burn down now. At least there won't be looting. It's always an attempt to besmirch and denigrate minorities, the left, poor people in terms of inner city poverty. It's always like those bad guys. And I'll say this too. I have friends who are on the job that work NYPD and a lot of other police departments. You work with a lot of police departments in the entertainment business and a lot of cops and stuff. And a lot of them are really good guys that want to protect and serve. But a lot of them get indoctrinated into this. You don't get it, man. You don't see how those people live. They're animals in those things. I'm just reacting to the way I have to. And that's something, there's almost like a warlike mentality that overtakes these police officers. And I think it's interesting, like you said, it was a year ago, right? And there was such a common event. Like the girl who filmed it was 17 years old. She was bringing her 9-year-old niece to get snacks at the corner store. It was a very normal interaction and a normal night in the lives of all of these people. And then abnormal violence was interjected upon this, and he murdered him in this pedestrian way, and that's where the outrage came from. How he was acting like he's sticking his hands in his pocket and picking rocks out of the tracks of the car. He was casual about it. And I think that is part of the reason it became such a watershed moment, because it was just average. There was no reason for any of this. And the guy who did it with this impunity, what are you going to do about it? This is what I get to do because I have a badge. And thankfully today we got justice.
And Nina, did you watch the verdict? Were you watching while the verdict came down?
Yeah, I did. And my first reaction was like everyone else, oh, thank goodness. Thank you, jury, because we've seen it go the other way so many times. And then the second thought was of Eric Garner. And here in New York, again, it was on video. It was unquestionable what happened there, and many other examples. It was a good day in that sense. And then the other thing, when I got back on Twitter for a little while, and I saw Cernovich and people like that tweeting about how the jury was terrified. They had to rule this way because they knew that if they didn't, there were going to be This is the right's response to this verdict, that they did this. I don't think I'm not watching Fox. I don't think they're saying it on Fox, but these people on right Twitter, what's left of it, are saying, oh, the jury just had to do this because they were going to riot. And I have to say, this is the moment, really, to start talking about how you think, you just said that Americans have been very restrained. And I think that we have been restrained, except that in the last month or two or three, the number of massacres, gun massacres in this country, it's getting closer and closer to every one of us. It's unbelievable what's going on. It's unbelievable. It's like the virus abated so that this other virus, this other terrible American sickness could come surging up again. And the point that I'd like to make is to the Cernoviches and the rest of them, is that do the math, man. Every single one of those massacres, which is, by the way, one per day, more than one per day averaging in this country right now in the year 2021. We've had more than one gun massacre a day, most of them by white men, young white men. Do the math. How many BLM protests does it take to equal one of those one day in America of a white boy with a gun? This is something that we need. This morning, again, I jumped on Twitter and saw Pompeo. I like to follow him. Pompeo's on tweeting about how your Second Amendment rights are under greater attack than ever in history, and I'm going to stand up for them. I'm paraphrasing. What is that? I mean, that is obviously he's running for. He's going to run against DeSantis, and they all have to get as close to the gun world as they can. But what is that in this era of erupting out of control and really terrifying violence?
Well, it's the flip side, isn't it, of what we've been seeing, the Chauvin trial, and there's so much fear built up on both sides. There's so much fear built up against the supposed Black Lives Matter movement is going to do to your world and what it's going to do to your suburbs and how it's going to upend everything you've ever had. And then that creates the opposite reaction of we've got to get guns because we've got to protect ourselves. We've got to protect ourselves against these marauding masses. And it's that construct that's being created. I firmly believe this isn't a constructed division that we are going through in America, that forces from the outside of this country basically creating a division, and whether it's through social media manipulation or whatever other weapons they might use, even some real life tactics, that they're creating this tension for us. We're responding to it like it's a real thing because it's real in our lives, but the causes of it are not natural. They're happening externally from us. And let's say there's China and there's Russia out there that are trying to destroy America. That's really their goal. For me, it's really hard to see that there's any other real reason for them to do all the things they've done, whether it's install a Donald Trump or whether it's not tell us about coronavirus or whether it's the endless amounts of manipulation around our alliances around the world or you name it. They have not been shy about their aggression towards America. And what is that for? What is that for? It's designed to destroy America. Even Bitcoin, I was deluding to think that was a good thing. And then I discovered that's also another sort of Chinese manipulation or potentially a Chinese manipulation trying to damage the dollar. So we've got these forces outside that are really trying to destroy who we are and destroy our existence. And that's why they're doing all of this. And so every time we have even a conversation about the violence or about the division or about our race tension, we're actually in some ways giving into what they want because they're hoping we amplify all of this. They're hoping we create even more division in our country. And in fact, maybe the answer is just to turn away from it and start talking about them because they're the real problem. There's a lot happening to us that we are not recognizing that's part of this formula. It's so unnatural for us to have a shooting a day. Do you understand how unnatural that is for any society around the world? It does not happen naturally. There's no way just specifically American men have decided suddenly, hey, we're going to go and shoot up people. It doesn't happen anywhere else in the world. Why is it happening in the most advanced country in the world? It just doesn't make any sense. It's happening because they've been somehow forced into it or controlled into it or positioned into it, whatever you want to say. But it's not a naturally occurring phenomenon. It's something that we have to realize is happening to us. We're victims of this. We are victims of this violence.
These types of weapons that are being used have been around since have been available to civilians since the 60s. You've had ARs, you've had Mini-14s, you've had all types of semi-autos, that can spew any type of caliber or weapon. And ever since Columbine, it just seems like it's just gotten worse and worse and worse and worse to where we are today. The way Nina described everything so accurately, what's the common denominator there? There's always been these types of weapons around. And granted, we had the Brady Bill in effect for a period of time, which kind of lessened the availability of these types of weapons. But really, it just took off like a moonshot, and it's still going in terms of how many people are doing it. Personally, I think a lot of it has to do with being radicalized in some manner, primarily through the internet in some way. I have no idea specifically, but people are just being exposed to these types of pressures maybe that cause them to do these things. And the availability of weapons certainly doesn't help. But I don't think
there's weapons everywhere. I mean, there's weapons everywhere. That's not really it. It's got to be something else.
They've been everywhere. They've been everywhere since the 60s, the 70s. You could go out and it was much easier to get a gun in New York State back then than it is now. And the restrictions are much more prevalent now, at least in many states. Some other states, it's pretty damn easy to get a weapon, but there's something weird there. Are they being radicalized by who knows? It's certainly possible.
Well, we know who it is. We know that it's actually. I'm waiting for Nina to roll her eyes at me when I say Russia, but we know that Russia is involved in absolutely radicalizing people online. You know that they've been doing it on Reddit for years. We know they've been doing it on Chan4 for years. This is part of what that whole crew did with Donald Trump Jr. and his whole crowd. We had lots of coverage of that. We've certainly seen how the Proud Boys came into existence because of Roger Stone. We've seen the Oath Keepers, whoever they are. These are things that have been intentionally created for us and for this moment and for this confrontation, which they want or someone wants. And whether it's the attack on innocent black people or black men getting shot in the streets for no good reason, or whether it's the random shootings happening in supermarkets, there is an incredibly traumatic event happening. And to what extent is that happening? Like, why do the people want us to suffer so much in America? Whoever's doing it to us, why is there so much suffering being inflicted on us?
Zev knows that I don't agree with him on this. And obviously the Russians and the Chinese and the Saudis and the UAE and many other countries and Israel are very interested in the politics and policy of this country, and they are active. They actively engage in it in some way or another. The Russians, but I got to tell you a couple things. To say that this problem is an exteriorly created problem, to me, is just missing. It's absolutely missing the sweep of American history and the way that this country has developed and the sort of elastic push and pull between the right and the extreme right and the left in this country, and anti-immigration movements and racism. And you cannot tell me that the Columbine boys were Russian agents or influenced by Russia. No. This thing that these kids are into, this dark place, is not created by the Russians. It's got a lot of other things. There's tech, there's the Iraq War. A lot of these people came back from the Iraq War to find their cities and towns drained of treasure, of blood and treasure, just squandered and wasted on Afghanistan and Iraq. And I can tell you that as somebody who grew up in the Midwest, and I don't think that this is they may have, as we do, as our intelligence agencies do, looked for divisions and tried to provoke and expand them. But I think the problem is much more, it's here, it comes from within, it comes from policies that have been promulgated for decades by the government, where these cities and towns are left with no mental health care, no decent health care. There are lots of problems here, and you cannot blame it on the outside. I don't think you can blame this problem on the outside. The radicalization, the right-wing radicalization, again, maybe they're on the internet provoking it, but look what happened to the NRA. That was ridiculous and it worked for a while. It was horrendous. I've seen the bots. I've been the victim of the NRA Russian bots.
Russia really did fund the NRA.
4,000. Right? Yes, exactly. But
but the NRA is the people that funded the politicians which have been opposing any legislation against gun control for decades. They're the reason why, that is still Russian money. Actually, that's maybe not the best example.
In a minute, we're going to talk about the corporations that still fund those legislators.
Absolutely. Look, I think it's an alliance of things. I don't think it's Russia on its own. I don't think it's China on its own. I think that the masters of the universe, whoever they might be, the top 1% of Americans who happen to be white and Christian fundamentalists, and they want to keep it that way, or you've built an alliance with these enemies of democracy. And the end result is the ordinary person in America in a ping pong wall with the ball being flung around. Like, we have no real control over anything. We're just like victims of forces on either side, and there's very little way for us to impact that.
One thing I will say is that there's evidence that at least Islamist radicalization has occurred online. And the Fort Hood shooter is a good example of that. So I think there is definitely some of that going on. This is a uniquely American problem. There's no question in terms of the kind of violence that's going on. But I think, as you say, it's enhanced, it's inflamed, where maybe it's the goal of some of our enemies to inflame it or enhance that kind of thing. Nina brings up some excellent points as well. Yeah, I didn't even think about that. And there was actually, there's no, radicalization can happen very easily with someone who's desperate, who really doesn't have anything to go home to, who may have a drug problem, or a vet that has some serious psychological issues. That's certainly easy fodder for anyone looking to radicalize someone. So,
can I say one thing too on that? There's also been, like, I'd say post 9/11, there's a fetishization of guns and weapons that are designed to hunt people. Now, people always had guns. There was always there, but they didn't used to have bumper stickers of their AR-15 on their pickup truck. And it became like amosexuals, I call them, and people call them sometimes. It became this like social stratum of people, of young, mostly white men that like think it's cool to have all this stuff. And these weapons of war are very profitable. 50 million guns were sold just last year. These are guns that are designed to hunt people, not hunt deer, not go skeet shooting with. And that's what they're into. We see these pictures every day on Twitter of families all posing with their big rifles with their scopes on it. So there was part of it like came out in the open and made it okay to do this. And I think your Clint Eastwood propaganda movies about sheepdogs, American snipers or whatever, there was some element manipulated and interjected into the conversation from NRA and right-wing politicians that were like, look, this is what a patriot looks like now. He's armed and ready to defend the homeland.
They fed an entire conspiracy theory. They fed a complete manufactured conspiracy theory that they had to defend the homeland. That's why they showed up there on January the 6th, because that they believed that to be true.
Absolutely, but I'm not even taking it that close. I just mean, post 9/11, I've seen this style of men, a military haircut, the sunglasses, the big militarized pickup trucks that are all over the roads now. I live in Westchester. I see these pickup trucks. Dude, you work in customer service in Parsippany. What are you doing with the King Ranch version 4? You're on your way to Katona right now. But it's...
I got to get some dessert for the kids.
And that's how they go out. Now, that's how they're pulling into D'Agostino's. It's like, I grew up here in the 80s. We didn't drive that stuff. We drove Volkswagen Rabbits. And pickup trucks were Toyotas. So my point is there's money behind it. There's money in over-arming people, in overselling them in pickup trucks and survival gear. And unfortunately, we have a world where that's an appealing thing for a lot of people. Nina said, and like Andrew said, the normal world has shrunk. Now, a lot of the world doesn't make sense anymore. And when you're in fear, you want to take action to feel stronger and more secure. And in America, we have companies ready to step up and say, here, buy this truck. You'll escape when the power goes out and the roads go out. Buy this gun. You'll shoot your way out of this thing. And it doesn't work. I
can only imagine how much damage one person could do like that if they're just panicked thinking that they got to do something and get out of Dodge, or when the shit hits the fan and let's go up to my Alpine Redoubt, try to ride it out.
Noel makes a really good point, though, to bringing up 9/11, because I think in some ways that is the source of we underestimate or forget how it unmanned men. Like, what happened there was such an awful thing that we saw our president in hiding, and then the day, like the trauma of that day, and then the ISIS, that followed by the ISIS eruptions in 2014. And I think there's this whole community of just, it's fear And it's that sense of being unmanned and having to match. You're talking about what in Katona or in Westchester, up here in upstate New York before the election, we had these Al-Qaeda guys going up and down the road with the trucks, with the flags, exactly like ISIS, and beards, and the whole thing. They had the whole ISIS kit. And they were like driving up and down the highways. And you assumed that they had guns in their cars or their trucks as well. And that's what they were doing. And I think I don't know if anybody's done a real study on this, but I think somebody should really write a book about how everything after 9/11, the security industry just exploded. And that's where you get Rudy making all that money, right? He's a security guy. He could make millions selling he was walking through the rubble of 9/11. And it was all about security. And if you go to DC, like I lived in DC in the 90s, and I go back there now, just the amount of money, the federal money that was spent on defense and biodefense and other kinds of defense and national security and local security and security, right? The ocean of money that came out of 9/11. And it's not just AR-15s in the gun industry, but the whole thing. And it's like a psychotic situation. I'm sorry, but I mean, it's very creepy.
Like with the anthrax also after that. And then
the bioweapons thing, this whole thing with writing this book about the virus, I looked into a little bit these conspiracy theories about Fauci and bioweapons. You know about this, right? So the NIAID actually was given hundreds of millions of dollars for biodefense. And so what is biodefense? Well, it's a bunch of scientists sitting around messing with things in labs that if they got out of labs, you wouldn't be too happy about it. It's it was tons of money, and it's American. This was going on in Fort Detrick and around Washington, and post 9/11, the whole anthrax thing, as Andrew said, they blew tons of money on anthrax vaccines. They didn't even need them. Somebody got very rich. There's always somebody getting very rich off of this. There are lots of swimming pools and McMansions that have been built on this security, this explosion of this obsession with security and fear of what's coming.
Because 9/11 gave us the war on terror. A lot of people are saying the coronavirus is giving us a new surveillance industry in terms of how people are being monitored in terms of their illness, whether it's these digital passports or these other ways of monitoring our movements or our body temperatures as we move around.
It's certainly true in China.
Yeah, it certainly seems like there's a whole new industry spawned out of the coronavirus. I'll just leave it at both of those things came from externally. But leave that for now.
Yes, the virus did come from the external world.
So did 9/11.
Yes.
So in the midst of all of this, speaking about heightening tensions just for the sake of, political power, I guess, Governor DeSantis wanders into the midst of all of this with a narrative. Is funded by viewers like you. Support our independent journalism at patreon.com/narrative.